There's a panic in the watch industry, and no one seems bothered. If you are ultra wealthy, this doesn't concern you, but if you are in the middle class, this is for you. The middle entry watch market is getting crushed, and Switzerland wants you to think it's because of the tariff. But it is so much more, and will expose everything. And by the end of the video, you'll see what it is. The clock, the gold bar, and the meeting nobody photographed. Remember when a delegation of Swiss business leaders gave a gift to the leader of the United States government in 2025? It was a Rolex desk clock, the kind that sits on an executive's shelf rather than a wrist, reportedly worth somewhere between 25,000 and 40,000 francs. Next to it was a 1-kilogram gold bar. Engraved on the gold bar are numbers 45 and 47, the number of the U.S. president's presidencies. The delegation flew to Washington to talk about tariffs. No press pool, no official readout with photographs, the way these meetings usually get staged for both sides. Just a room, a president, a handful of executives, and 2 objects changing hands. Weeks earlier, Rolex's own chief executive, Jean-Frédéric Dufour, had invited the U.S. leader to watch the U.S. Open men's final from the Rolex corporate box. The kind of invitation that could have been tagged as pure hospitality, until you learn what happened 10 days after the follow-up meeting. The optics were already warm before anyone walked through the White House door. Think about the sequence for a second, slowly, the way you would if a friend told you this story about their own industry instead of yours. A CEO puts a foreign head of state in his company's private box at a marquee sporting event. Weeks later, a delegation from that same country shows up at the White House carrying a clock made by that CEO's own company, plus a gold bar with the president's name on it in everything but words. 10 days after that, the tariff crushing that CEO's industry gets cut by more than half. Every individual step in that sequence has an innocent explanation available. Strung together, in that order, it reads like something else entirely. 10 days after that meeting, the United States agreed to cut its tariff on Swiss goods from 39% to 15%. Switzerland's economics minister admitted to a newspaper in plain language that everything accelerated once the business leaders got in the room. So, would you call that lobbying? Or would you call it something else? 2 Swiss lawmakers called it something else. Greta Gysin and Raphael Maheim, both Green Party members of parliament, sent a letter to the country's Attorney General in late November 2025 asking whether the gifts amounted to bribery of a foreign official under Swiss law. Their letter didn't name the companies involved. It didn't need to. The end does not justify all means, they wrote, especially when respect for important provisions of our legal order is at stake. Not everyone in that room sees it that way. Alfred Gantner, a co-founder of the investment firm Partners Group who attended the meeting, told a reporter afterward that public-private collaboration had simply delivered a needed resolution to a painful trade dispute. And look, that's a fair thing to say out loud. Businesses lobby governments constantly. Executives fly to capitals with gifts constantly. Maybe this was just diplomacy wearing an unfortunate outfit. But by January, a United States senator was asking the same question from the opposite direction. Ron Wyden, of Oregon, sent a letter to the U.S. Trade Representative on the 28th of January 2026, asking for a full accounting of the U.S. President's acceptance of the clock and the gold bar as donations to his presidential library, and whether that acceptance violated federal rules on gifts to sitting officials. For context, a Swiss federal employee cannot legally keep a gift worth more than 200 francs without handing it to the state. Trump kept a gift worth roughly 500 times that limit. The tariff relief showed up on schedule. I'm not a lawyer, but nobody has been charged with anything. The Swiss Attorney General's office confirmed it received the complaint, filed against persons unknown, and said reviewing a request doesn't mean an investigation has opened. That's where the story sits right now. Unresolved, uncomfortable, and almost completely absent from the watch press that usually can't stop talking about who wore what to a film premiere. It's worth asking why the watch media hasn't touched this harder than it has. Part of it is access. Nobody wants to burn a relationship with Rolex over a story about a desk clock when that same relationship gets you press day invitations and loaner watches for review. Part of it is genre. Watch channels are built to talk about lume and bezels and movement architecture, not Swiss criminal code. And part of it, honestly, is that a bribery inquiry involving gold bars and gift clocks sounds almost too on the nose to be taken seriously, the kind of detail that would get cut from a script for being unbelievable if it hadn't actually happened. What nobody in that press wants to say plainly is the blunter version of events. The industry was already fragile going into all of this. 110 Swiss supplier companies had hit government-supported short-time work at their peak in early 2025. Months before the tariff fight even started, a hangover from the 2023 boom cooling off. Then the tariff hit that already weakened industry directly, and export numbers cratered by more than half in a single month on top of it. The fix, when it finally came, didn't arrive through some careful negotiation over trade balances or industrial capacity. It arrived attached to a gift bag. That's the part everyone skips. But the tariff itself, the story of how it got that high in the first place, is worse. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. How a phone call became a 39% tax. Rewind to August 2025. Switzerland got hit with the highest US tariff rate of any Western nation, 39%, higher than the European Union, higher than the United Kingdom. For an industry that ships well over half its export value into markets built on discretionary spending, a tariff at that level doesn't just squeeze margins. It changes whether a sale happens at all. How did Switzerland end up singled out at that level? By most accounts, a phone call between the US and the Swiss president simply went badly. Switzerland's own top trade official later admitted, when asked what her country could have done differently, "I honestly don't know. I see what others did differently, but that's just not Swiss." Other countries flew their leaders to Mar-a-Lago. Switzerland's presidency rotates every year, which makes that kind of relationship building nearly impossible even if the country wanted to play that game. By her own account, it doesn't. So, the rate landed at 39. Exports to the United States collapsed by 56% in September, then nearly 47% in October. Watchmakers weren't losing customers who'd stopped wanting watches. They were losing shipments that no longer made mathematical sense. A margin that works at 10% doesn't survive a jump to 39. Brands simply stopped sending inventory rather than eat the loss, and the export chart fell off a cliff that had nothing to do with taste, trends, or a speculative bubble bursting. By November, after the Oval Office meeting and its gifts, the rate dropped to 15%, tied to a broader framework. Duty-free quotas for American meat, easier access for other U.S. agricultural goods, and a pledge from Swiss companies to invest $200 billion in the United States over 5 years. That's the trade. Watches for Wagyu, essentially, with a gold bar standing in for the handshake. Even with the new framework signed, Washington opened a separate Section 301 investigation into Switzerland that March, the kind of formal trade probe that can drag on for months. The gift didn't buy certainty. It bought a lower number and a lot of continued anxiety. Then came February. On the 20th of February 2026, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that the law U.S. admin had used to impose the tariffs in the first place, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, never actually gave them the authority to impose tariffs at all. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the opinion himself. The law lets a president regulate imports. It says nothing about taxing them. Roberts wasn't shy about it. The government, he wrote, could not point to a single other statute where the word regulate had ever been read to include the power to tax. Not every justice agreed, and it's worth hearing why, because the disagreement wasn't frivolous. Justices Thomas, Kavanaugh, and Alito dissented, arguing the majority was second-guessing, a power presidents have used broadly for decades, and that the statute's language was less narrow than 6 of their colleagues claimed, and that should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Within hours of the ruling, the U.S. admin signed a new order, imposing a fresh tariff under a completely different law, Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, this time at 10% globally. with plans to push it toward 15 within days. Switzerland's rate, freed from one statute, landed right back under another almost immediately. The entire legal foundation of the original tariff had just been declared unconstitutional by the country's highest court, and the practical result for a watchmaker in Geneva was nothing changed. The tax stayed. Only the paperwork explaining why it existed got swapped out overnight. And that 10% never stood alone. A separate tariff authority, Section 232, layers an additional charge on top of it for anything classified as steel or aluminum, 50% on the raw material and 25% on finished components made from it. A steel watch case doesn't get to pick which tariff regime applies to it. It can get hit by both, stacked, at the same time. So every one of those steel sports watches losing value while gaining volume, the ones that make up the backbone of the middle market, is doing that while quietly absorbing two separate tariffs layered on top of each other, neither of which has anything to do with whether the watch is any good. It didn't even stop there. In May 2026, the Court of International Trade looked at the replacement tariff, the Section 122 one, and ruled that it was unlawful too, in a separate case brought by small businesses. That should have been strike two against the whole tariff structure. Instead, a federal appeals court issued a stay days later, keeping the tariff in force anyway while the government's appeal plays out. Two different courts, two different rulings, and the tariff a Swiss watchmaker actually pays hasn't moved either time. I keep coming back to that pattern. It's the detail that bothers me most in this whole story. Not that a president lost in court twice, but that losing in court barely mattered either time. Picture the export ledger at a mid-sized Swiss manufacturer through all of that. 56% down, then flat, then a court ruling, then right back where it started, twice. The refund, nobody's collected. There's a footnote to the Supreme Court ruling that almost nobody in watch media has touched, and it might be the strangest detail in this entire story. When the court struck down the IEEPA tariffs, it didn't just say Trump lacked the authority going forward. It said those tariffs had been unlawful since the moment they were imposed. Economists at the Penn-Wharton budget model put the total collected under that illegal authority somewhere between $175 and $179 billion, more than the annual budgets of the Department of Transportation and the Department of Justice combined. Legal experts describe that money, under long-standing precedent, as an illegal exaction, funds the government was never entitled to keep in the first place. Which raises an obvious question nobody in this hobby seems to be asking out loud. If a Swiss watch importer paid that tariff on shipments between April 2025 and February 2026, are they owed a refund? The honest answer, months after the ruling, is probably, eventually, maybe. The Supreme Court resolved the legal question and handed the mechanics back down to lower courts. More than 1,000 businesses had already filed refund claims before the ruling even came down, including the plaintiff whose name now sits on the case itself. Learning Resources, an educational toy company that took on the fight nobody in Swiss watchmaking was willing to start. Justice Kavanaugh, dissenting, warned about the sheer administrative mess of trying to unwind over a year of collected duties. Nobody has said when or whether watch importers who ate that cost actually see any of it back. Sit with that for a second. An entire industry got hammered by a tax. A court eventually ruled was never legal to begin with, and the people who wrote that tax a check are still waiting to hear if they'll ever see the money again. That's not a footnote. That's the story, and almost nobody outside a handful of trade law newsletters is telling it. There's a reason Swiss watch executives don't bring this up in interviews, and it isn't the reason you'd assume. It isn't embarrassment about the furlough numbers, or the export collapse, or any of the headline damage. It's something quieter. Raising the refund question publicly means admitting, on the record, that the industry spent the better part of a year treating an illegal tax as a cost of doing business, without ever challenging it in court themselves. The companies that sued were toy importers and small businesses. Not one major Swiss watch house put its name on the lawsuit that ended up freeing the whole industry. They let somebody else fight it, then benefited anyway. That refund fight is a courtroom problem. The next problem shows up on the export spreadsheet itself, and most people reading it are getting it backwards. The number everyone's quoting is lying to you. Here's where most coverage of this topic goes wrong, and this is how. In April 2026, Swiss watch exports to the United States fell 56.4% compared to the same month the year before. Headline writers grabbed that number and ran straight to collapse. It's the loudest figure in the whole dataset. It's also the most misleading one. April 2025 was inflated. Brands and retailers, bracing for the tariff hikes everyone knew were coming, front-loaded inventory into the United States that spring, shipping ahead of schedule to beat the deadline. That created an artificially high base. So, when April 2026 gets measured against it, the drop looks catastrophic. Strip out that distortion and the picture changes. The Federation of the Swiss watch industry itself noted that, over a longer window, US imports had actually grown almost 9% compared to 2 years earlier. France tells a similar kind of lie. Exports there jumped 57% in 1 month, which sounds like sudden French enthusiasm for Swiss horology. It isn't. France became a logistics hub, rerouting watches to other destinations because of lower shipping costs and friendlier tax treatment since December 2025. The watches aren't staying in France. They're passing through it, the way a package passes through a sorting facility. Anyone building a collapse narrative on France's growth number is building on a figure that describes a warehouse, not a customer. Which market told the truth this whole time? Meanwhile, up at the very top of the market, an entirely different story was playing out, one that never touches the export data at all. Philips Geneva ran its 10/20 watch auction in May with a 99.6% sell-through rate, $96.3 million taken in a single room, and 43 individual world records set for specific references. The wealthiest buyers on Earth weren't hesitating. They were fighting each other for lots. That's the same month the middle of the market was quietly bleeding out. So, if the loud numbers are noise, what's the actual signal underneath them? It's this. Watches priced above 3,000 francs at export, the top tier, grew 3.7% in May. Watches in the 200 to 500 franc range grew over 20%. And the middle, watches between 500 and 3,000 francs, the exact zone where a huge share of ordinary buyers actually live, fell more than 17% in that same single month. That's not tariff noise. That's not a base year distortion. That's real demand disappearing from the one price band that actually determines whether a regular working person can afford to enter this hobby at all. Retailers and brand executives speaking to WatchPro this spring described the same split in blunter terms than any official statement would allow. The market above 50,000 francs is holding up fine, they said, and below that line, everything is contracting sharply, with 3 names as the exception: Rolex, Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe. If your brand isn't one of those 3, the mid-tier collapse doesn't care how good your watch is. The industry isn't collapsing evenly. It's collapsing selectively, and the selection is almost cruel. Record auctions at the top, growth at the very bottom, 3 brands sitting safely above the wreckage, and a hole punched straight through everyone else caught in the middle. That selective collapse has a shape in the export data already. Brands are reacting to it, and the reaction is stranger than you'd expect. Gold-plated panic. When a segment of the market disappears, brands don't sit still. They look for an exit that keeps the top line intact even while the middle rots underneath it. In May 2026, one material category did something nobody was projecting: gold steel. The bimetal combination Rolex made famous decades ago and that had fallen out of fashion for years, surged 34% in export value. Straight precious metal watches fell more than 7% in that same month. Pure steel fell over 5% in value too, and this time even volume slipped alongside it. Nearly 14,000 fewer watches shipped that month than the year before. That's a shift from the trade-down pattern earlier in the year, when steel volumes were still climbing even as prices softened. By May, steel wasn't just getting cheaper, it was getting scarcer on the export ledger too. Read that combination honestly, and it says something uncomfortable. Brands aren't innovating their way out of the middle market collapse. They're relabeling their way out of it. A bimetal watch lets a manufacturer claim genuine precious metal content and charge a real premium for it, while using a fraction of the actual gold a full gold case would require. It's the same trick jewelers have leaned on for a century, just redeployed at precisely the moment the middle of the market needed rescuing. A regular poster on Watch You Seek put it more bluntly than any brand press release ever would. in a thread about the two-tone pieces suddenly flooding retailer windows this spring. Gold steel isn't a design trend, it's a margin trend, wearing a design trend's clothes. Harsh. Also, based on the numbers sitting right there in the FH data, hard to argue with. Scroll through R, watches, on any given week this year, and you'll find the same suspicion surfacing in different words. Threads, asking why a familiar reference suddenly looks different on the caseback. Threads comparing a 2024 catalog photo against a 2026 one, side by side, trying to spot exactly when the gold content crept in. Nobody in those threads is citing FH export data. They don't need to. They're just noticing, correctly, that something about the shelf in front of them changed, and nobody at the brand bothered to explain why. Would you actually buy a bimetal piece right now, or does it feel like a tell to you? Say so below. Somewhere in a mall outside Chicago, there's a man in his 40s who bought his first real watch, a plain steel sports model, back in 2019 as a promotion gift to himself. He's been eyeing an upgrade for 2 years. Every time he checks prices, the steel version he actually wants has crept up, while a two-tone version of that exact same reference sits at a smaller premium than it used to carry. He doesn't know why. He just knows the steel option keeps getting harder to justify, and the gold-accented one keeps looking, against his own instincts, like the smarter buy. He has no idea he's watching an entire industry's pricing strategy play out on a single glass showcase. That's the quiet casualty in all of this. Not the headline export number. The guy standing in front of a case, getting nudged toward a two-tone watch he never actually wanted, because the middle of the market got squeezed by a fight that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with a courtroom 4,000 miles away. While all that plays out in price bands and case metals, the actual geography of who's buying Swiss watches is being redrawn, almost silently, underneath the whole tariff story. The map nobody's watching. Everyone's staring at the United States tariff drama. Meanwhile, the map is changing shape somewhere else entirely. India grew Swiss watch imports by nearly 49% in a single month this spring, and close to 40% cumulatively for the year. Mexico grew by 27%. These are still small absolute numbers next to the United States or China, but the growth rate itself is the story worth telling. A market barely on anyone's radar 3 years ago is now expanding faster than any established territory on the list. At the same time, the traditional pillars are wobbling for reasons that have nothing to do with tariffs. China's cumulative imports through April were up modestly, around 3.5%, but still sit roughly 22% below the 2024 peak. The recovery there is real, but it's fragile, and consumer confidence among younger Chinese buyers remains shaky in a way that no single tariff decision explains. Japan, meanwhile, one of the industry's oldest and most reliable markets, has been sliding on its own separate track for months, down mid-single digits in several recent readings, a decline nobody's blaming on Washington because nobody in Washington had anything to do with it. And there's a third factor almost nobody in watch media connected to the export numbers when it happened. Bloomberg reported in June that fallout from the conflict between Israel and Iran and the wider regional fighting that followed was weighing on Swiss watch demand, specifically in Gulf markets. Saudi Arabia's luxury watch sales fell nearly 17%. Qatar fell almost 25%. Across the broader Middle East luxury sector, sellout figures dropped by roughly half, according to analysis from Vontobel's Manuel Lang. A ceasefire framework between the US and Iran was signed that same month, and tensions eased before rising again. Picture a boutique in Doha in March, the kind of showroom that normally moves six-figure pieces to walk-in clients without an appointment. The lights are still on, the staff are still there, but the calls that usually come in from clients wanting something rare, something with a waiting list, just weren't coming. Not because those clients ran out of money, because a missile exchange a few hundred miles away made spending $100,000 on a wrist accessory feel, for a while, deeply beside the point. Nobody at the corporate level writes that down in an earnings call. It shows up instead as a 17% drop with no explanation attached, sitting quietly in a spreadsheet next to numbers about tariffs that get all the attention. So line up the actual forces at play here. A tariff regime built on a law the Supreme Court struck down, then rebuilt under a different law within hours, then struck down again by a trade court and kept alive anyway on appeal. a bribery inquiry hanging over the deal that lowered the rate in the first place. A war in the Middle East quietly gutting demand in some of the wealthiest watch-buying countries on Earth. None of that is a taste problem. None of that is Gen Z rejecting logos or quiet luxury-killing flash. The explanations you'll find in almost every other watch video on this topic. This is an entire industry getting shoved around by forces that have nothing to do with what's actually sitting on anyone's wrist. Has any of this actually changed what you're buying this year? Add it all up, and there's one more piece of this that isn't finished yet. It's happening right now, while you're watching this. 11 days. Here's the part that makes this whole story different. The 10% Section 122 tariff, the one that replaced the version the Supreme Court killed, is scheduled to expire around the 24th of July, 2026. On July 8th, Switzerland's top trade diplomat, Helene Boudliger-Ardieda, gave an interview in Zurich where she said, "There's a good chance the country locks in a lasting 15% rate once the current arrangement lapses." Her actual words were telling, "Swiss companies," she said, "care about the number, but they almost now nearly care more about the predictability and the stability of the number." After a year of a rate that moved from 10 to 39 to 15 to 10 again in less than 12 months, predictability has become the real product Switzerland is negotiating for, not a lower tax. A tax that stays put long enough to plan around. Nobody knows yet what happens on the 24th. Maybe the 15% framework holds. Maybe another court intervenes. Maybe another gift shows up somewhere and nobody notices until a senator asks about it 8 weeks later. And maybe, if the talks stall the way they stalled last August, the rate snaps back towards something closer to where this whole mess started, 39%, with a fresh round of front-loaded shipments and panicked inventory decisions rippling through every showroom that stocks Swiss watches in America. Weigh the two paths against each other. A locked-in 15% gives brands something they haven't had in over a year, a number they can actually build a pricing strategy around. A collapse back toward 39 puts the entire United States market, still the largest single destination for Swiss watches on Earth, right back where it was the week after that first phone call went wrong. That's not a small technical detail buried in a trade filing. That's the difference between a stable back half of 2026 and another cliff. That's the honest state of the watch market heading into the second half of the year. Not collapsing from bad taste or a dead speculative bubble, but hanging on a legal and political thread that could move again before this video finishes uploading. Until then, this is where we are now, and we wait for what is next. Let me know what you think would happen next. Please like this video and subscribe.